morning and welcome to the Thursday devotion. This past week, hundreds of people gathered in the state capitals of both North Carolina and Missouri to protest the stay-at-home orders. There were also countless conversations about when is it the right time to open up the economy? When should we go back to work? When do we need to still stay home? The only thing I think we all agree on these days is that we are all sick of waiting. We are tired of waiting in our homes. We are tired of waiting for this pandemic to be over. Now last week I referenced a book that I had read about 10 years ago called The 7 Spiritual Gifts of Waiting. And I talked about the gift of patience, the spiritual gift of patience, how often it comes to us through our waiting. This week I'd like to talk about the spiritual gift of humility. Now, why is humility a spiritual gift? Why is humility so important? Well, the first reason is that humility leads us to God's grace. What do I mean by that? Well, it is only in humility that we begin to see all the ways that God's grace surrounds us, all the ways that we are experiencing God, whether we're aware of it or not. As people often ask me, what exactly is God's grace? And the standard answer is it's an unmerited gift from God. As United Methodists, we use the term grace a lot. And I usually say, I add to the unmerited gift and basically say that whatever is good and right in my life, well, that's God's grace. That's it. Whatever is good and right in this world, well, that's God's grace. Grace surrounds us, and half the time we miss it. But there's so much good, even when life is hard, even when we are in the midst of a pandemic, grace still exists. God is still there meeting us and loving on us. And I think humility helps us begin to have eyes to see the grace around us. Grace also leads us to love rather than achievement. Most of us desire achievement. We want to be recognized for the things that we've worked hard to do or accomplish. But the reality is that the most important thing we do in life is to love. When I was a teenager, my mom used to point it out by saying, Jane, someday when you stand before God, God's not going to ask you what college you went to or what degree you got, or even how much money you make someday. God is going to ask you, how did you treat people? Who did you love, and did you love well? I think that's one of the things that humility leads us to, that the most important thing we can do in this season of this pandemic is to love others, to reach out to other people, to let them know that we love them, that is the gift of humility in this time of waiting. Humility also will lead us to non-judgment. It's so often I feel like I hear people who get all riled up because they went out and saw others without a face mask or saw others without wearing gloves. I really think that humility reminds us is that we do not understand how others live, and we're to humbly accept that we don't always know what other people go through. As Christians, we are challenged to forgive others because we have been forgiven. And I think the challenge is also to not judge because we are not judged by God. We are loved and accepted and covered by His grace. The last thing that comes to us through humility is honest assessment. What I mean by that is that humility not only leads us to what are our strengths and our weaknesses, but rather an accounting of how God views us. To really think about how does God see us. 1 Samuel 16 says it this way, God sees not as people see. People look at the outward appearances, but God looks at the heart. Humility reminds us that God knows us. He knows the very core of us, and still He loves us and surrounds us with His grace. Humility is not an easy thing to learn, but the thing about humility is when you move into a place of humility, God's grace just begins to surround you, so much so that after a while, all you can see is His goodness. I'm not there yet, but that's what I am aiming for. So in this season of pandemic, I'm going to pray and ask God to give me a heart of humility, I hope you'll join me in that prayer, because I believe in every season of life there is something that God can teach us. Have a very good Thursday. Bye-bye.